Welcome to this session with the driving growth, sustainability, and jobs regarding Tamil Nadu. I'm very happy to be in conversation with the Honorable Minister, Dr. Pannavil Tyagarajan. So, let me extend a warm welcome, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of CII to all those who are attending this meeting and also the Honorable Minister, who I think doesn't need any introduction. But let me first say that personally, I think I have known the family and him over the years, and I can well say that he is not just a multifaceted personality, but he has maybe one of the very different and varied experience for somebody who is in politics and who's the finance minister of Tamil Nadu. I mean, if you look at his career, he has been an international investment banker with Lehman Brothers. Then he moved into Standard Chartered Bank, and he actually stepped down from there as senior managing director of the financial markets. And if I can say so, like we speak about families in business, I think his is a family who has been in politics. He is the third generation family member, and I have had the honor and privilege of knowing his father and also having interacted with him in various other roles, if I can use that word. But most importantly, I think he is someone who has been exposed to different cultures, different way of approaching solutions, and I think that is something which he is bringing into practice as after he has become the finance minister, and that's something which is all of us are looking forward to hearing from you, sir, today in terms of how you see the future of the state and how you see the shaping of this future, if I can use that word. And finally, as part of the introduction, I have to say that he's been had an opportunity to move into or been exposed to 60 countries, and using that diversity of cultural experience is something which he has used and brought to the fold when he has stepped into the political field. And he is somebody who hails from Madurai, and he is being elected from Madurai, and therefore we are very proud to have you with us here, sir, as the representative of Tamil Nadu. As far as the topic is concerned, we are well aware that Tamil Nadu has always been in the forefront in terms of growth, has been one of those states which has benefited from its traditional expertise in different sectors, in different capabilities. But most importantly, I think post the focus in terms of the global supply chains from India, I think Chennai has been at the forefront. And as we speak, we have the great opportunity of not just being numero uno in India, but also being part of a global supply chain and global delivery of value, which I think we can really be able to see going forward. I would say, in spite of the pandemic taking place during the course of this year, we have seen significant investment commitments taking place in the state, and close to 60,000 crores of investments have been signed on after the new government has come in and taken charge. So I think with these words, I would now request the Honorable Finance Minister to give his comments, and then later we'll be throwing open to the floor for more questions. In fact, he preferred to be taking more questions. So I think once he finishes his address, we will be happy to take questions on board. So over to you, sir. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
So first, thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you very much for the very gracious introduction. As you mentioned, our families have known each other for a long time. I've been privileged to interact with you before, so I'm especially happy that you're the host and moderator for this event. As with most of these events, I don't really have anything prepared because I figure it's better that we have questions from the audience that I can try to answer to the best of my ability. But I will make a few opening remarks more about, shall I say, my experience over the last 6 months as a minister, what that has taught me about the positives and negatives of our situation, as well as philosophically, the chief minister's perspective on some things, including our path to a $1 trillion economy, and whatever maybe some more micro, some more tactical rather than the strategic vision that the chief minister has. I can talk a bit about that. So first, let me start by saying that it has been a kind of immense learning experience for 6 months. These jobs are incredibly complex, and it always fascinates me how the administration of a state of a scale and size manages to function without the basic infrastructure that even a small scale business would have. So we're about a $300 billion economy. We're about a $45 billion budget, about 8 crore people. It's a bit shocking to me that things are not worse than they are. We lack infrastructure and data and systems and institutional memory and institutional connectivity. Just today, for example, I called a meeting of the IT secretary, the ELCOT managing director, the BharatNet project director, and I started talking about the fact that I keep on getting these requisitions for purchase, but I don't see any standards for ensuring that all of the systems talk to each other, that there is a minimum security standard, that there is a protocol. What do you have to comply with if you get software as a service? What do you have to comply with if you get software? What if you get hardware? There's no inventory management system. There's no in place a system to check for continuity of contracts after warranty expiring, service provision. And most of all, that with these days the cheapness at which you can get RFID or other tags, why government equipment is not tagged so that we can trace it and mark it and do some other things with it. I don't want to bore you with the detail. So the first and most important observation, I think, is that the administration of our government and therefore of the kind of platform on which our economy and our democracy is built is lacking structurally, and of course then there are other human resource issues that I won't go into here. The second, though, is that the potential is just immense, both at the state level and the national level. When I look at all the data, I look at all the comparisons, I look at the history, I would say there are two or three things that we got really right over the last 100 years. One is this notion of inclusive growth. Through the social justice movement, through various efforts, nothing comes 100% free. There may be some downsides, but the upside is that every community, every society, every region has some participation in the model. And therefore, the overall kind of Gini coefficient is quite low in Tamil Nadu compared to most other states in India, let alone most other developing countries. The second thing we got right was early focus on education. I think in 1921, the Justice Party government passed a bill for compulsory elementary education of boys and girls. And it has been continuously expanded from there, irrespective of the party in government. From 20 to 37, some version of the Dravidian movement. From 37 to 67, some version of the Congress. From 67 till today, again, some other version of the Dravidian movement. But there has been continuity, both in terms of the focus on education and in terms of the kinds of things you have to do to ensure children come to school and stay in school, like the noon meal program, which started as a breakfast program in the 20s in Madras Corporation, then expanded to lunch, then through Kamaraj expanded to all poor children, through MGR expanded to all children, and Talavar Kalaignar expanded it to nutritious, protein-filled eggs and so forth. That has been a path-breaking and world standard-setting kind of approach to ensuring the development of human capital and the universal accessibility of education. So it's very hard to destroy 100 years worth of advantages in 5 or 10 years. It's very hard to build 100 years worth of advantages in 5, 10 years for a competitor. So at a macro level, I say the things we have really going for us in Tamil Nadu are the inclusion of everybody, therefore the lower Gini coefficient, the lower Etratal, the spread, the social development and human development indices that are second to no large state, if not quite the best in the country. The education levels, and we are one of the 2 or 3 biggest, richest states by scale. Of course, we have many other advantages. We have from natural advantages like coastline to man-made advantages over the last, or coastline and minerals, actually, I should say, including rare earths and so forth, to man-made advantages like good infrastructure, airports, ports, roads. We can always improve, but compared to any other benchmark, we're decent by Indian standards. The human and soft infrastructure facilities, healthcare, education, so forth. And even little things like where the data cables run undersea and where they land, and what that gives you in terms of easy connectivity and so forth. Of course, nothing has been perfect. Without casting any political aspersions, the data statistically suggests that over the last 7 years, from 2014, and I'm not talking about regime change in 2011, but 2014 till 21, our financial indicators, our economic indicators have gone down. I published a very detailed white paper talking about it at every level, from government finances to macroeconomics, so I don't want to repeat that. But what it gives me is tremendous confidence, excuse me, that not only can we achieve our 1 trillion goal very reasonably, and I'll go a bit into the math of that, but that we have a blue sky ahead. We have unlimited potential and opportunity if we get some basic things right. So let me first talk about why I think the 1 trillion and the potential is huge, and then I'll tell you what are some of the basic things we're getting right. Uh, if we look at where we are today, to get to 1 trillion, assuming a relatively constant exchange rate, and this is why sometimes these benchmarks in dollars are a bit tricky, but just for the sake of today's discussion, if we assume a relatively constant exchange rate, to get to 1 trillion from here requires nominal growth of somewhere around 13% a year for the next 10 years. Now, if you take out inflation at 5 or 6%, that's looking at 7 or 8% of real growth, easily achievable, and in fact was the rate even between the kind of down years of 2017, 18, 19. Just for context, the 2006 to 11 DMK government had a CAGR of 10.3 or 10.2% a year, real, after taking out the effects of inflation, real growth rate. So, it's not inconceivable to, and it's not that hard. What we are going to do about it, though, is rather than leave it as a big number, we're going to break it down into which sector, what rate of growth, at what part of the cycle. The global economy is cyclic, different sectors are cyclical. We are not going to assume that everything stays the same. Of course, there may be shocks, but we have one big advantage. We are starting already at a very depressed level. Because of the COVID pandemic, we have a bit of a low base effect. In fact, the estimate for the GSDP this year is only marginally higher than what it was 2 years ago, and that's in nominal terms. So we think, we don't know because the statistics come out 1 year, 2 years too late, but we think that we are one of the few states that didn't have actual negative GDP growth rate in the last year during the pandemic. But starting with a depressed growth and having the low base effect, and we're seeing the buoyancy not just in our revenues but also in the union revenues. So we think that that's sustainable. And then with this concrete plan broken by sector, by part of the cycle of the next 10 years, we think is very realistic. We have a lot of natural resources. We can fundamentally transform policy efficiency. From the government's perspective, we have been very clear. These are repeated often, so I won't bore you with the details, but we're looking at data-centric and accountable and systems-based and kind of self-check and balance within the ecosystem kind of governance. I can't tell you because it's not public yet, and some of these differ not to get public eventually, but the amount of margin there is between doing things right and not doing things right is just unbelievable. We have lots and lots of examples. I think the chief minister has cited these in a couple of cases on the jewel loan and also on some of these other programs. So there's a lot of people. I'm sorry, can you still hear me, sir? I was just saying that our efforts over the last 6 months have yielded tremendous results, tremendous results, more than I ever expected. So much so that I am not at all concerned about honoring any commitments I made in terms of performance and so forth. And there's almost limitless possibility for improvement in every way. Every time I process a bunch of files, I think about how come there's no kind of online HR system? How come we don't keep a track of why we're moving people from one place to another and whether there's a nexus or not? How come we don't have an inventory system? How come the files are still in paper? How come there's no institutional memory? So these are things that, as you know, you run a very complex and large organization, that without these kinds of management tools and controls and checks and balances, then it's you what theory and what logic suggests happens that you get very inefficient outcomes, and you get a lot of wastage, and the opportunity cost of not spending that money to do the right thing or not providing the platform. Now, at some other level, if you step back and say the government in any country, particularly in a growing country, ought to be only a small portion of the economy, really our job is to facilitate the kind of environment where entrepreneurs like yourself can succeed and thrive. And so, part of that is ease of doing business, part of that is providing good infrastructure, part of that is providing transparency, part of that is removing barriers, getting out of your way. In the recent meeting with the Union Finance Minister, I had made some statements. I think they were reported in the press, talked about what all we're doing in terms of improving ease of doing business. We've removed some 300 or 350 technical requirements. We have many more we want to do. We want to provide a land bank so that entrepreneurs can be given land very easily. We want to improve connectivity, roads, airports, bridges. We think there's a huge potential strategically and commercially for Thoothukudi as a transshipment port. We think that the innovation will find a natural home in a place where there's high levels of educated people. We want to also cover up some basic imbalances, right? We are a state where about 1.5 lakh people get engineering degrees every year. We're about 4.5 lakh come out of plus two. But then we only have about 30 or 40,000 skilled trades coming out of the 90 ITIs of Tamil Nadu. So, this is an imbalance. We're woefully short skilled labor. And this is not, of course, a uniquely Tamil Nadu problem, but, I want to give an example. There was an accident led to a girder falling because of a pneumatic lift failing in Madurai recently. Accidents happen. I'm a former industrial consultant. What was shocking to me was that there were two young boys, really, like 24 and 26 or something from Uttar Pradesh, who were operating this equipment, and with just two human beings, with no manager, no engineer, no supervisor. And I'm sure these guys were not like PhDs in civil engineering or pneumatics. And so, there is, of course, there's the Indian kind of resilience, and, we get things done. But we are woefully short skilled labor, and we need to look at the German model. We need to look at other countries where there are dignified and high income jobs from such labor, and we can learn from them. So I think on my side, on the government side, I can assure you we're going to fundamentally transform the nature of our finances, of our financing model. We're going to do, we've already announced some, we're going to work on some more. We want to consolidate a lot of our entities. We need to find ways to raise large blocks of capital in a world that's otherwise awash with liquidity as far as infrastructure is concerned. And that's probably, one of the best ways we can support entrepreneurs is to provide world-class infrastructure and reasonable kind of transparency in the modalities of setting up and running a business. So, there's a lot we can do. There's a lot we are focused on. And I guess with that, I'll stop and I'll take questions. Hopefully, that will be more meaningful.
Thank you, sir. And I think I really appreciate the free and frank discussion. But if I can start with one question, I think we are having this time a unique situation where the finance minister, the industries minister, and the IT minister all hail from the southern districts of Tamil Nadu. And I think you spoke about inclusive growth and also the opportunity for making sure that Tamil Nadu stands in the forefront in that. So in that context, how do you actually see this evolving during the next, during this 4 years and also going forward?
Yeah, at the risk of exciting some comment, I would say that it is certainly true that there has been imbalanced growth across Tamil Nadu for the last, I don't know, couple of decades. The chief minister has been very clear when he says, "I want no one left behind." He says, "I don't just mean by samudayam or community. I mean by location." He says there should be no left behind districts. So we are very conscious about that, and in fact, the southern districts have some natural draw. I think between if you take the kind of Madurai, Thoothukudi, Kanyakumari kind of triangle going through Tirunelveli, there's a lot of potential there, as I said, both in terms of the port as well as the land available to do additional kind of processing activities. You may have seen we've already announced a big furniture park. We've already announced some other things. I think there's some other plans in the works for the Gangekondan SEZ. We seem to be attracting a lot of interest from people of global or national reputation and track record, and we are consciously steering them to places where the costs are lower, the labor is more easily available, the competition for labor is not as high, and where from our perspective we get inclusion. So for example, there's a lot of electric vehicle and related activity coming up now in the western belt in the Dharmapuri Krishnagiri area where we're providing some support. So we are taking a much more kind of granular. It's not just about overall growth. Just as we say, it's more about inclusive growth rather than growth itself. Then it's also about distributed growth geographically rather than growth itself. And I think, of course, our priorities would be in the second tier cities. And in particular, if you compare Madurai, I must say, has suffered quite a bit relative to a Coimbatore or a Salem or a Tirupur or a Erode over the last, 10, 20 years. So from specialized parks to expanding, to make Madurai International Airport and do goods transshipment to agricultural processing, taking advantage of some of the port connectivity, right? The Madurai Thoothukudi Highway may be the single most efficient and rapid transit road in Tamil Nadu in terms of how straight the road is and how quickly you can get there without any real kind of encroachment and stuff like that. So I'm a bit reluctant. I had one interaction with the CIA before, if you may remember. I think it was 2-3 months ago. I'm always a bit reluctant to go too much into detail into other people's departments because it's not appropriate for a finance minister. I think we have an industries minister, we have a small scale industries minister, we have an IT minister. So I don't want to jump the gun too much. I apologize if that sounds a bit evasive, but it's a delicate balance. So I can assure you that I will not rest and be considered successful in my own mind if I did not fundamentally change the rate of growth or jobs or opportunities in Madurai and from Madurai, southward. And as you say, we have a couple other ministers over there. And more than any of us, most important thing is that the chief minister has been very explicit that there should be nothing left behind, and it is very very obvious now in ways that are actually hurtful to Chennai in terms of the density of growth in Chennai has some other consequences, particularly in terms of encroachment into wetlands, the consequences when we have rains like today or last week. So I think it's in everybody's interest to be more balanced, and we'll certainly work on that.
Thank you, sir. Really appreciate that. And I think now I am actually going to get come to the questions which have come from the audience. So you have spoken about infrastructure. So what is a big infrastructure intervention which you are planning at least for the next 12 months? And also, I think you mentioned that what is your stand on making the cities and towns climate resilient?
Yeah, I think the second question is a bit harder, sir, because I think a lot of those are more long-term things. I mean, we can start on them soon, but again, I have been very open that if you ask us how we managed the last couple of weeks compared to, let's say, 2015, I'd say operationally, procedurally, The fact that we had meetings before, planned, did an assessment, cleaned out hundreds of kilometers, set up and devolved power to the individual managers, engineers of the dams to release water. So, what was doable through the soft part of the kind of management of such things, I think we did reasonably well, just like we did with COVID. But in COVID, we were able to stretch into the hard part, which is things like making beds and getting oxygen and so forth, because they were relatively simple things and relatively short term things. As you know, including your enterprise, many people have now come forward, and Madurai is effectively oxygen self sufficient. We have learned, and within 6 months of coming to power, all the hospitals are oxygen self sufficient. So these are things that are doable in the short term. In the long term, the fact that water bodies have been encroached, the fact that urban planning has not been enforced, these are all 30, 50-year-old problems. These are not, one regime, one government, 1 year. And these require some profound thinking and starting at the basics. For example, when we had some recent meetings in the chief minister's office, I was very clear. I said this should not be about either money for us or costs for the builders and the people who use these raw materials like sand and jelly and all that. It should be about first, what is our policy? What do we want to leave our children? What is the environmental kind of overarching goal? And then from their perspective, they should really only care about, is it timely, is it predictable, and is it reasonably kind of transparent? Because surely the input costs of these relative to cement or steel or wiring or lights is not that high. For neither of us is it really about money. It's about uh, our policy priorities, transparency, enforcement, checking, having the best monitoring systems, and ensuring that we have a clear policy, philosophy of how we want to protect the environment while at the same time enabling growth, and ensuring that we have the tools, legislatively and technology wise, to enforce that vision through our actions and not have a disconnect between the two. So, that's relatively, again, simple compared to the water body restoration or the urban planning. But I think the announcement by the chief minister recently of a committee with a special officer is a sign that we realize these are not short-term problems or short-term solutions. We need to come up with some profound new thinking on this. Go back to your earlier question in terms of infrastructure. I think we've announced so many projects, and in fact, I have files in front of me for tens of thousands of crores. I think really the way we look at it is two or three things. That is maybe more broad and more kind of value add. The first is, it is the government's kind of responsibility as much as it is a limit to spend up to 3% of GSDP on capital investments. Right? I mean, of course, you can't do that till you have zero revenue deficit, but at least from our side, or any such project that involves the government as an equity holder is a no-brainer because we borrow at the lowest cost possible. We are the sovereign, or relatively close to the sovereign. We have the least amount of roadblocks in our way because the rent seekers cannot rent seek from the government itself. And whatever we build is likely to have a high multiplier effect, whether it's industrial estates and ports, or even if it's something like water, drinking water systems or healthcare, it increases the productivity and longevity and, therefore, the longer term productivity of the workforce. So, we are in a unique position that our investments in anything, big hospitals, drinking water systems, sewage systems, reduce disease, improve hygiene, improve productive hours of day, improve traffic, reduce congestion, increase productivity, increase work hours for every person, for millions of people in the urban area. So all of these, that's the one realization. Second is that right now we have been doing things very inefficiently. We have all these funding vehicles. I don't want to get too much into the details, but some of them I already talked about. We had this, Ms. Jalta had this vision of a off-balance sheet vehicle entity. We set up something called TNIFMC. It's been around for 7 years, done nothing basically. It just ran through 100% of the equity. So we cannot afford these kinds of visions without outcomes. So we need to collapse and consolidate a lot of those. There's also a profound question of what are the things that we should invest in 100% equity. Right now, the government does everything 100% equity, at least at the state level. from toilets and classrooms in corporation schools to kind of bus stands. Right? That's not a very efficient model. It may be a good model for rent seeking and politics, but it's not a good model for development and growth. So one of the things we are talking about is coming up with kind of multiple categories of projects. Of course, if we're building toilets or classrooms in corporation schools, we never expect to get direct revenue from that, and therefore 100% of that equity should come from the government. But if we're building things like water systems or pipelines, maybe we get partners who have expertise and find a way to actually bring the kind of skills that we don't have and the execution skills that we don't have, remain a majority partner, but get somebody else to bring and have skin in the game and do, kind of what the government of India is doing post hoc monetization, monetize some of the cash flows ahead of time for the next 10 years, 15 years, something like that during the course of the development, and find a way to do a BOT or a PPP or what Mr. Gadkari has, a hybrid development program, or I forget what the name is called, hybrid asset plan or something, to do that. And then, of course, there are projects which are, pure cash cows from day one, which are high cash flow and very predictable cash flow kind of things. And those, I think, we should try to find kind of longer term capital that can run through, with 100%. We'll be equity partners more for the sake of removing roadblocks and keeping some check and balance. But we should be able to find maybe, let's say, 74-26 financing to take those. And so, for example, in the smart city program in Madurai, about 380 crores were spent building a bus stand nobody asked for. That's creating more problems than it solves because it's got like 4,500 parking spots for which there's no access to, regulator kind of traffic. So not only was it a bad project, not only because 100% of our equity was ours, nobody was there to check why is this even being done. Not only is it inefficient waste of 100% capital, it will create new problems. And now, if we were to go and tender the shops, for example, there'll be rent seeking opportunities on that. So, the corporation will not get a good return on its equity either. So, I think there are profound changes we can make. Of course, some of them will be relatively resistance free, some of them will have resistance. But someone said to me, I think from the AIIB, former Gujarat IS officer, he said, we always talked about that you need political will and administrative skill. And I think, in the last few years, maybe both were missing, but much of the time, both were not present. Now we have the luxury of a leader who has a very clear vision. And hopefully, people like us who have the history of executing at relatively complex systems can along with the officers bring in the administrative skills. So I would say it's more a philosophy of how we finance these things. We have already, for example, in the list to the Union Finance Minister, I've talked about the 12 road projects, the 6 airport projects, and the big port project. Those are macro level technical discussions, but we need to do this in scale. We need to decide what are the things we should do 100%, what are the things we should do 50%, what are the things we should do 26%, and therefore leverage the limited fiscal deficit room that we have with other partners and scale up the rate of infrastructure investment. Ms. Jalta had the same plan, if you remember, in her Vision 2023. She said if infrastructure investment goes up from 3 to 6%, real growth can go from 8-10% to 12-14%. Mathematically, economically, that's true. She was just never able to implement it because within a year of that report coming out, she started having legal troubles and then other things. But the truth is the truth. Good ideas are good ideas, no matter who it comes from. And maybe we will have greater success implementing such good ideas.
Thank you, sir. I guess we will keep talking to you on this point because that's something which both as CII and as business community which is of great interest for us. But actually, I just want to do a follow-up question before I request Mr. Kundasamy because I think here also another question. Obviously, from how the way you explained from the 1 trillion state of the economy, it's possible. But I think the question which had been asked by the audience is, what is the government's vision for the micro and small enterprises? And how does they have all taken a huge hit post-pandemic. And how does the state look at it from both from a prohibitive input cost and also the labor issues which they continue to face? I think this is a question from the audience.
Yeah, it's probably the most important and the hardest component of the economy. So it's easy for us to do macro stuff. It's easy for us to do funds. It's easy for us to attract global investment at scale. What the government lacks is execution capability. All governments, everywhere in the world, and we are probably worse than average in India. I mean. So the real priority for us is, let me break it two, three ways. And in fact, ironically, the one with the highest kind of focus on this within our economic advisors globally is Raghuram Rajan, who keeps reminding us, that we need to do more, we need to do more. I would say we have done slightly more than others or than we expected when we came in. I personally have chaired a couple of state level banker committee meetings. The CM himself has chaired one. We discovered a lot of things. I mean, they were not just random meetings. We discovered, for example, that the local bank branches did not know all the schemes and the reliefs and the support that the RBI and the union government had announced, and therefore they were not being passed on to the entrepreneurs. And so, in the first SLBC, we all collectively agreed, and some part of it is my suggestion, that the RBI runs training programs. The RBI Chennai runs training programs for the bankers operating in Tamil Nadu in the MSME credit sector, and then those people, along with the MSME department of the government of Tamil Nadu, develop some awareness programs and outreach programs. I must say also that the union recently encouraged some things. I attended one of these in Madurai, where we had a bunch of banks, 18 banks or something, host a bunch of entrepreneurs and hand out a few hundred crores, maybe 300 or 400 crores. Now, not like earth shattering or big, but better than not having an event like that in loans. So, the focus on MSME is much more about job creation. I think I'm not saying that those are the engines that are going to drive massive growth like export led or service led or IT or software as a service or innovation. But they are the core of the economy. They're where the bulk of employment happens, at least non-government employees, and they are the ones, as you know, and I remember distinctly a conversation with you, where even though you run large industries, you think about your OEMs and your suppliers and your downstream people, and they all have suffered a lot. So we have announced a couple of things, like the state is going to also get into the loan guarantee program to try and help people in addition to the union loan guarantees. We're going to try and run more local facilitation, like what we do, one single window for the or global entrepreneurs and enterprises. We really ought to do this for MSMEs in every district. So these cells that are kind of support cells to help MSMEs resolve their bottlenecks, whether it's with the banks, where sometimes it's with the government agencies or licenses or issues, things like that. But there's really two or three tiers to this, in my mind at least. The one is kind of the big money, actual investors, not industrialists, but investors. The Canadian pension plans, the Macquaries, the BlackRocks, the big infrastructure asset investors, and that's something that the government really needs to face off against for the most part. Then there's the second level, which is the kind of global corporates. Some of you are big enough that you yourself are global, but traditionally what we have focused on, the Daimlers, the Saint Gobains, the TVS, the Murugapas, the Tata, so forth. And then there's this layer of the MSME, which is actually from all the way from micro to medium, which is very much what do you call it, local. It's not a question of integration. Of course, big guys like you, they are in your value chain, but really that should be about innovation, about extending business facilitation, about credit, about guidance, about lending, shared services. For example, we're setting up these places where they can get listing or audit or filing or compliance kind of shared services. And I think, though it's not again my department, and this is just a preliminary idea I've been having, so don't take it at too much value. that we need to tie up a lot of our Tamil diaspora in around the world who are entrepreneurs. I'm not talking about the big listed corporates. I'm talking about entrepreneurs who are 50 million, 100 million, 10 million, 500 million businesses, and connect them to these MSME sector where they can either partner up or get suppliers, or or even give their expertise and advice, or expand their reach into the global market, so forth. So I think there's a lot we can do. Again, it's not my department, and I don't want to get too far out of my domain, so I won't say much more than that.
Thank you, sir. Actually, I do have a follow-up question to one of the points you mentioned because it has been asked by one member of the audience. But before that, I request Mr. Ponusamy. I think he had a question to ask you directly. Go ahead, Mr. Ponusamy.
Good evening, Minister. Very happy to
Good
see
evening.
you. Yes. See, the Honorable CM has kept target of 1 trillion economy and 100 billion exports. I think it is easily achievable. Recent ranking of Government of India, Tamil Nadu is the largest land bank holders. We have a lot of lands in South. Still, we are. I think the agencies are procuring land, acquiring land. That is good. And also our guidance bureau, they are doing extremely well in attracting investment. See, I see India, the Tamil Nadu, the school passing students got about 55% to the college. It is double the national average. And also out of which 25% goes for PG. So we need jobs for knowledge-based people. I think that is one thing. So you being an international banker, you have a lot of exposure. Is there any possibility to similar to GIFT City? Is it possible to bring, or like Singapore International Finance Center? Is it possible like that? So knowledge based, maybe BPO, so many things. I think Mr. Government must be working. For you, it is easy. I think you can think on this. I think you will be working on that. And also, we are very happy that you are able to find out about nearly 2,000 crores unspent money by different departments. To enhance the fast development, is there any possibility to upspend your government infrastructure creation? Is there possibility? If they let them not wait till the end of the financial year, I think can they upspend? Is it can finance department can push this so that it can there should be some monitoring, it can be done. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, sir. I think there are 2 or 3 different questions in that, so let me maybe decompose that. The last part, yes, not just the finance department. Our borrowing limits are predicated on achieving certain goals, and one of them is hitting a certain ratio of your annual capital expenditure by September 30th, and then another percentage by December 31st. So we are naturally incentivized by the union government, and therefore, that plus our own interest, we are pushing capital expenditure as fast as possible. Realistically, my personal experience is that it is not a question of the funds. To be fair to the Union Finance Minister, she did a couple of things pretty positively. She released the compensation payments ahead of time. Whether you consider it loan or not is a different question. And then she also, I think, right after a meeting on Monday, she announced that they were speeding up the devolution funds, an extra tranche in time. So it's not even a question of liquidity. And as you say, I found 2,000 crores. As I said then, there's much, much, much more. We just don't know when and how we can take it and what are the rules and the accounting logic and all that stuff. So the real issue is execution. And in execution, I'm a bit concerned that it's very hard to correct the system. The system had become venal, to tell you. Just take the example, right? The chief minister of the state was on a truck giving a campaign before the elections that you will never have this problem in T Nagar again because we have spent 1,000 crores laying new tunnels and stormwater drains. And then what happened? So my point is the system is not that good. I say it myself. But we need to put some new kind of philosophy, new checks and balances, new approach, new people ideally, but again, we're limited to the people we have in the government service. So there are some structural limitations. You cannot, it's It's very hard to build execution capability. It's relatively easy to destroy it. It's very hard to recreate it after it has been destroyed. So, my frank opinion is that it is not a question of whether we have the money. It's not a question of how fast we can release it. It's a question of how fast it can get executed. And there was this, large nexus between certain people in the government and certain people in the construction industry or contractor industry. And those are things that have to be cleaned up. That's the truth. It's a bit kind of unusual to hear it out loud, but it's the truth. And if you look at last year, a lot of last year's spending was this kind of last days of the Roman Empire, last minute grab. Others have commented on it. The recent rains have shown us the consequence of it. So, in fact, we'd be hard pressed because we are conscious about ensuring real outcomes. Now, I can sign any file without reading it. I read every file. I comment on every file almost. So it takes me twice or thrice the amount of time as it would if I just signed it. And that's after I process like 1,500 files, so I can see patterns much more quickly. So I think, yes, capital investment and yes, infrastructure is very important. Execution ability cannot be developed overnight. So I would say it will probably take us a little while. It's not a constraint of funds. It's not a constraint of liquidity. It's a constraint of not trying to do something so fast that you can't control the quality or you set yourself on the trajectory that is not recoverable from later. That's really the bottleneck. You said something earlier about Gift City of Financial Services. Listen, the platforms go where the talent is. Even back in 2006, when I said I had to move to India for family reasons, and Lehman said, go and set up this platform for us in India, I argued that Chennai was a far better cost benefit trade off than Mumbai in every way. And that's true. Actually, though I've left the financial services industry behind and I was always a front office guy, I was always a trader or a banker, so I'm not quite aware of the extent of middle and back office work that goes on. I'm slowly starting to get the feel that Chennai is a much bigger hub for banking support services than I understood first. Almost all the major banks, many of the major asset managers, and some of the hedge funds already have a big, if not their biggest Indian operations in Chennai, in and around Chennai. And so, the ecosystem is there to create a financial services hub in terms of both data pipe connectivity, as I say, the cable lands here. Many of the big support providers, the TCSs, the Infosys, the Wipros of the world also have their data centers. Like, for example, at Lehman Brothers, our backup data center was in Chennai, the redundant data center. So, it's not my department again, so I've not been too intrusive. But at some point, I think if we put all the pieces together, we may find that we have a wonderful ecosystem already that can easily be scaled. But that's a good point. I really hadn't delved into it. I'll ask the IT minister and the industries minister to look into that.
Thank you, sir. As I said, you did mention about the single window clearance potential for MSMEs and making sure that that is possible for them. And I do understand that that's a subject for maybe the IT minister to talk about. But still, I think one key question which was there was, while from an industry side, obviously the embracing of the digital solutions is something which kind of COVID pandemic has triggered and made it happen. And we know from a government side, you are very clear that you wish to do it. But two questions. One, how do you actually envisage it getting linked with the day-to-day requirements of the common man? And second, from a finance perspective, how do you see budget allocation to such kind of actions?
Those are very good questions, sir, and actually very close to my priorities, in the sense that I have been arguing internally, though it's not universally accepted, that this notion that we need to keep on building more and more offices, creating more and more taluks, creating more and more kind of clerks in these jobs is outdated. Right? We are on a path. Tamil Nadu is one of the highest internet penetrations in the country. It's all across the country. Most major urban areas are 100%. And because we are the most urbanized state, that already takes care of a large portion of our population. But even the TRI data shows that for a state our size, very few states of our size, or rich big states like Karnataka, Maharashtra, Gujarat, have the penetration in the rural areas that we have. So, you put that plus the 52% statistic that Mr. Ponnasamy cited, we should be shifting all these things online. So, for example, one of the things that when I agreed, partly from a budget perspective, partly because it was my job to do an e-budget, and we put a computer on every desk, I found so many advantages of that because we were able to load all the PSU financial statements. We were able to load all the last year's records. We were able to load 100% of the tabulations that show line by line. As you know, the budget is a very involved process that shows line by line. So, had you had an educated minister MLA who wanted to be very, time focused, while the minister is speaking, they could have tapped up a bunch of stuff on the screen and said, "Hey, how come 2 years ago you said this?" And of course, the problem is the 2 year ago ruling party is now the opposition. But that's a short term problem. In the long term, so we have announced, for example, we're going to digitize the assembly. But those computers that we had in this Kalevana Rarangam for the COVID room will not fit in the assembly. So the question was, should we buy this one time? Well, it wasn't that much. It was probably a couple of crores for a big state like us. But the point was, I said, when this assembly session is finished, send those 234 to the 234 MLA's constituency offices. I requested the speaker and he agreed. And let them each open a e-Seva Mayam in their MLA office, like I already have in mind with my own money and my own staff. And surely no government officer is going to try and do rent seeking on birth certificates, death certificates, legal aid certificates, community certificates with an MLA's office. Surely the MLA has enough power to get this done. So you devolve this responsibility to 234 MLA's offices and you increase the access to the people. And that's just one example. So I'm saying generally we need to be moving more to e-services for everything from filings to approvals to certifications to permits to everything. And that has some real consequences. Right now, if you look, the government of Tamil Nadu has cut its spending on operations and maintenance from about 10% of its budget down to 5% of its budget in the last 10 years. That's not sustainable, meaning when you have the increasing cost of electricity, larger and larger buildings, more and more places to take care of, you should be at least spending adjusted for inflation or GDP or budget size the same percentage, but we've been going down because there's not as much rent seeking in that business. So, in the building business, there is. So, I've had multiple conversations where I say, why do we keep building these white elephant buildings, right? The Madurai new collector office is like a few lakh square feet. Now, when you were the British, you built these large edifices to show the majesty of empire and grandeur and keep people suppressed. And you for the heat, you build these high roof, high ceiling buildings. We do the worst of all worlds. We build multi-lakh square feet, high ceiling buildings, and then AC the whole place, which becomes very inefficient. And then we have to pay the electricity bill for it or default, as many of these municipalities, corporations have not paid the EB they've used in a long time. And then, make it harder for people to find out. If you go and look at the government hospital in Madurai, it's like going to an amusement park, right? Like you can't figure out where is what and how do you get what service. It is incredibly complex to manage. So we need to fundamentally change the nature of this. We build small, environmentally friendly, accessible, easy to navigate, easy, to understand offices, and stop this massive and put the money into maintenance, put the money into keeping it clean and properly supplied with all the water. Like the CAG audit says, right? They have all these Swachh Bharat toilets built, but no water supply. So some things have the nature of rent seeking has fundamentally skewed some priorities the wrong way, and we need to reset that and come back the other way. So I completely agree that unless we can provide transparent, timely, on the phone, services to the common man, not only are we not doing them a service, but the inverse of that is we're putting all our money into the wrong things for the wrong reasons, and we need to stop that as well.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And I think obviously having an interaction with you is something which we'll be glad to have continued. But unfortunately, we know we are got only 1 hour with you, so we really appreciate the time. And as always, I think we end up feeling a great positivity, when we interact with you. So really appreciate that, and thank you for taking time out, because this is obviously a national event where we have you with us today. On behalf of CIA, I think the only thing I can say, and also on my personal behalf, we are very happy to work with you and with the government of Tamil Nadu to make sure that we are there to support you in all of your endeavors to make this a 1 trillion economy. And obviously, we will keep coming back to you, but we are happy to also be any brand ambassadors of Tamil Nadu whenever and wherever you need us. So please count on us for that support. Thank you for the
Thank
time.
you very much. We realize, of course, the government can only do so much. Entrepreneurs, trade associations, and NGOs and other people have a big part to play. It is our intent to work as closely as possible with all those who have the skills we don't and who have the connectivity we don't. Government is only the platform. You are all the builders on top of that. So always happy to participate, and thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you everyone for having joined this event. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.